Let the painter finish her little art project first. Then the real soldiers can take the line. That's what they said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But she didn't speak. She didn't even flinch. Staff Sergeant Eliza Kade kept dragging her chalk wheel across the dust, focused, precise, like their laughter didn't exist. Then the wind struck, tearing through the range, snapping her hair tie loose, sending golden strands whipping free, and that's when they saw it. The Phoenix tattoo, a symbol whispered about in Tier 1 circles. Every voice went silent. Then came the shot, and the three-star general saluted her. Who is Staff Sergeant Eliza Kade? And why does her story still echo across the Marine Corps? The desert didn't care who you were. It didn't care about rank or reputation. It didn't care if you had medals or muscle. The heat stripped you bare, and the silence left no room for bravado. So when Staff Sergeant Eliza Kade stepped onto the Marine Corps' most advanced long-range firing facility, dragging behind her a blue chalk marker on wheels, no one paid her much mind. To most of the men, she was just the paint girl. Her movements were quiet, controlled. Her uniform was sun-faded and dusted at the knees. Stray strands of blonde hair slipped from under her cover, dancing in the heat shimmer rising from the sand. There was a rhythm to her work, not rushed, not slow, just deliberate. She wasn't watching the others. She wasn't reacting to the snickering, the whispers, or the side eyes. She was laying a perfect white line down the firing lane, straight as a ruler, like it mattered more than their attention. That's when Gunnery Sergeant Mason Burke spotted her. Hey, let the painter finish her little art project first. Then the real soldiers can take the line, he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. The other Marines, younger, jumpy, testosterone-fueled, burst into laughter. They loved it. Classic Gunny Burke. Always had something cocky to say. Always knew how to remind people who was in charge and who wasn't. Burke strutted across the range, boots crunching into the dirt, arms crossed, chest puffed. He wasn't a bad Marine. He was seasoned, decorated. But somewhere along the way, he'd confused volume for authority. To Burke, Eliza Kade was out of place. A staff sergeant doing grunt work. That had to mean she wasn't important. Maybe admin. Maybe logistics. Either way, nothing that mattered out here, where precision was king and reputation was carved in muzzle flashes. But Cade didn't respond. She didn't even look up. Her hand stayed steady on the marker handle. Her boots traced the dry earth like she was drawing something sacred, and in a way she was. Every inch of that line had to be straight, sharp, defined. She walked it like she'd done it 1,000 times. Or maybe like she hadn't done it in years, but still remembered exactly how. From the tower at the far end of the range, General Halverson watched through his binoculars. He wasn't watching Burke, though the gunny's voice had reached even the tower. He wasn't watching the other Marines either. His eyes tracked the woman with the chalk line. He watched the way her feet adjusted to the shifting terrain. Tiny corrections, like a sniper finding balance on unstable ground. He watched how her shoulders remained level, even when the wheel hit a rock, how she adjusted course without pause or emotion. She was working, yes, but it was something else too. There was stillness in her, a kind of internal gravity that made everything else, the laughter, the desert wind, the egos, seem far away. Halverson had seen that before, in combat, in recon, in snipers who survived things no one talked about. That kind of calm didn't come from comfort. It came from having faced chaos and refusing to be shaped by it. It was the silence of someone who didn't need to prove anything anymore. It's easy to overlook the quiet ones, especially in the military, an environment where volume and rank often go hand in hand, where barking orders, slapping backs, and dominating a room are mistaken for leadership. But there's a different kind of authority, the kind that doesn't speak unless it has something to say, the kind that doesn't correct you, it just lets you see your own mistake. Staff Sergeant Eliza Kade was that kind. She didn't lecture, she didn't challenge, she didn't raise her voice, she showed up. And sometimes that's the loudest thing a person can do. Because when you're truly competent, when your skills are real, tested, and sharpened in places no one else wants to go, you don't need to announce it. You don't need to shout people down. You just keep laying the line. One step at a time, perfect, unshaken, and eventually, the world stops laughing and starts watching. Back on the range, Cade finished the line, turned the chalk box, and started another. The Marines were already back to joking with one another. Gunny Burke was pointing toward a paper target at 800 meters, talking about a shot he once made during a sandstorm in Kandahar. Cade didn't interrupt, but General Halverson never took his eyes off her, because he remembered Kandahar, and he remembered the Phoenix unit that operated nearby. Ghosts, really. Legends whispered about in the barracks. A sniper unit so elite, they didn't speak their names, only their symbols. He lowered the binoculars, eyes narrowing slightly. The way she moved, the way she ignored the noise, the precision, it was familiar. And something deep in his gut told him that line she was painting, it wasn't just a firing boundary. It was the line that would separate everything that came before from everything about to change. They were 5 minutes from qualification when the system died. The most elite sniper candidates in the Western region, hand-picked Marines, SEAL liaisons, even a few reconnaissance specialists from Allied forces, stood at the edge of the range, nerves tight, fingers twitching, scopes zeroed. This was the test that would determine who advanced into one of the military's most selective recon sniper programs. Then came the flicker. The lights on the range's $3.2 million electronic target system dimmed, then blinked out entirely. A few shrugged. A minor glitch, they thought, until the techs started shouting. Until the control board, the one that managed all 23 target lanes, wind compensation calibrations and feedback sensors, sparked, then smoked. That's when the whisper started. Systems fried. Dead power board, no backups on site. Chaputai. Burke was already on the comms, trying to get someone from the maintenance unit on the line. The commander was pacing like a man with flames under his boots, and General Halverson, still silent, was standing with arms crossed, scanning the lanes like he could will the system back online with sheer authority. It didn't work. The meltdown spread fast. Marines who were just minutes ago flexing and laughing now looked like kids whose science project had fallen off the table right before judging. Some began arguing. Some blamed the techs. Others blamed the wind, the heat, even the curse of this range. But mostly, they stalled. Everyone was waiting for someone else to fix it. The official word came down, qualification suspended until further notice. Burke's jaw clenched hard, not because he was upset, but because deep down, he feared what would come next. Because when official systems fail, the unofficial ones take over, and there was a backup option. A brutal, outdated, unforgiving one. The cold bore test. No sensors, no diagnostics, no retries. A manually placed steel target at maximum range. One shot, no warm-up, no second chances. And to make matters worse, the wind had begun to howl. The mountains in the distance funneled gusts across the range, kicking dust into eyes and throwing mirage lines across the air like broken glass. It was the worst-case scenario, and that's when the real silence began. No one stepped forward. Not the techs, not the candidates, not even Burke. It's not a fair test. Wind's too erratic. We need calibrated optics. Excuses came like floodwater, fast, chaotic, and desperate. No one wanted their career ruined by a single bad shot. Even the commander, red-faced and visibly trembling, pulled back. He said they'd reschedule, send everyone home, retest under optimal conditions. But Halverson didn't move. His eyes were on the firing line. And his thoughts, though no one could hear them, were probably something like this. Failure is not always about losing. Sometimes failure is not stepping up, and the higher the rank, the more devastating the silence becomes. We like to believe leadership is about bravery, and it is, sometimes. But more often than not, leadership is about presence under pressure. It's about stepping forward when every instinct in your body tells you to protect your status, your image, your pride. In that moment on the range, the loudest Marines were nowhere near the trigger, and the ones with the best scores, they were suddenly more interested in talking about weather patterns and fairness than stepping to the line. Because fear doesn't always wear a panic face. Sometimes it wears confidence. It smiles. It offers logic. It justifies retreat. But make no mistake, that moment was pure fear. Fear of failing publicly. Fear of missing the target. Fear of not being perfect when it mattered most. That's the thing about high-pressure tests. They don't just measure skill, they reveal character. Then came a sound no one expected. Click. The lid of the chalk marker snapped shut. Staff Sergeant Eliza Kade, who had been working quietly off to the side, finishing her last chalk line like none of this mattered, stood up. She dusted her hands twice, slow and methodical, and walked. Not rushed, not dramatic. She didn't say anything, didn't ask permission, didn't even look at anyone. She just walked toward the line, like the chaos didn't touch her, like the wind didn't exist, like the whispering, the failure, the collapse of everyone's resolve was background noise. Burke blinked. "What are you doing, Staff Sergeant?" No reply. She passed him. That same calm was in her every step. That same gravity Halverson had seen earlier. Still anchored, still unfazed. "You going to point your paintbrush at it and hope for the best?" Burke smirked, louder now, more anxious than amused. But even he heard the way his voice cracked at the edges. Cade didn't look back. She stopped at the M210 sniper rifle that had been staged for demo purposes. It hadn't been touched. No one dared. Until now. She knelt beside it, removed the dust cover, opened the bolt, checked the chamber, inspected the scope mounts. Not with a torque wrench, but with practiced thumb pressure. Then, she chambered around. The metallic snap of the bolt sliding home cut through the desert like a knife. Some of the candidates began muttering. "Who is she? She's not even on the roster. Is this a joke?" But Halverson wasn't laughing. His eyes narrowed. The wind picked up again, a wicked cross current. And that's when it happened. Her hair ties snapped. A thin black band, dry and sun-worn, finally gave out. Her hair whipped into the air like a battle flag and exposed the tattoo. It wasn't just ink, it was the symbol. A black phoenix, wings unfurled in flames, with a centered crosshair at its heart. And just like that, no one said a word. No one needed to. Because every Tier 1 shooter in that region had heard of that tattoo, they just never thought they'd see it in person. She could have waited. She could have let them call it off. She could have stood with the others, pretending the wind was too strong, the odds too unfair. But Staff Sergeant Eliza Kade didn't wait for permission. She simply finished the line. Her chalk wheel reached the end of the dusty path, and with a soft thunk, she lifted it. A soft cloud of powder lingered in the air. Then came the sound. 2 sharp claps as she dusted her palms, like she was closing a chapter. Then, without hesitation, she turned and began walking toward the firing line. No one spoke. No one moved. They just watched. The woman they had dismissed as the paint girl was now walking into the place every man on that field had feared to stand. Gunnery Sergeant Burke squinted, uncertain. His arms, once proudly crossed in arrogance, now hung slightly unsure at his sides. "What's she doing?" But he already knew. They all did. There was something in her pace, that unfaltering, deliberate rhythm, that didn't allow doubt. Each step was purposeful, measured, like she'd walked this same stretch of dust many times before, under different skies in different countries, under much darker stakes. The rifle was there, the M210 enhanced sniper system. It was clean, loaded, untouched. She knelt beside it. No flare, no hesitation. Her fingers danced over the bolt, checking the action. No wasted movements, no second glances. Every motion was smooth, reflexive, like the rifle wasn't just a weapon, but an extension of her. Even the wind paused, just for a second. Then, as if cued by fate itself, a sudden gust tore across the range. Violent, dry, loud. The kind of wind that rattled helmets and pulled sand into your eyes. But what it pulled most was her hair. The already frayed black tie finally gave up, snapped. Golden strands whipped into the air like silk in slow motion. And there, on the back of her neck, it was revealed, the tattoo. A dark, inked phoenix, wings outstretched, a perfect, centered crosshair burned into its chest. For a long moment, no one breathed, because every soldier, every shooter worth their salt, knew what that symbol meant. It wasn't just a decoration. It was a calling card. Phoenix, the most elite sniper program in all of special operations. A Tier 1 training initiative so brutal, so selective, that even its existence was denied on record. Only 7 confirmed graduates in 3 decades. Whispers in briefing rooms, myth among recon teams. And Eliza Kade was wearing it like a scar. Burke stepped back. Literally. The man who had towered over her hours ago now stood frozen. Not in defiance, but in realization. He had mocked a ghost. She settled into prone position. Her body merged with the dust. Elbows anchored, cheek welded to stock. Scope adjusted with the practiced rhythm of someone who never stopped training, even when the world thought she had retired. No range flags, no spotter. Just her. The only sound was the wind, howling across the range like a live wire. The distance was unforgiving. 10 or 86 yards, a cold bore shot, no warm-up, no forgiveness. She exhaled once, slowly. Her finger met the trigger like a whisper. And then, the shot, not a bang, not a roar, just one crack, sharp, surgical, that seemed to slice clean through the air, cutting even the wind into silence. 3 full seconds passed. Then came the voice. Impact! Pause. Dead center. I repeat, dead center. Wakidobo. The comms officer sounded stunned, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing even with his own eyes. Then came movement. From the tower. General Halverson was already descending the metal stairs. Not in a rush, not with anger, but with intention. The same way she walked to the line. Step by step, his boots sent up faint puffs of dust. He ignored the instructors, ignored the murmuring crowd, ignored Burke completely. He walked straight toward Eliza Kade, who was now clearing the chamber with the same quiet focus she had used painting chalk. She stood as he approached, and he didn't speak. Not right away. His eyes weren't on her face. They were fixed on the tattoo. His expression didn't show surprise. Only confirmation. He already knew. And finally, with a sharp pivot, General Halverson came to attention. His right hand rose, and the 3-star general, commander of one of the most prestigious Marine installations in the country, saluted her. In the military, salutes are common, but when a general salutes a staff sergeant, without prompting, without ceremony, it means something far beyond rank. It means reverence. It means recognition. And in that moment, every pretense on that range evaporated. Every joke died. Every assumption dissolved. Because Eliza Kade hadn't argued. She hadn't corrected anyone. She didn't reveal her credentials. She didn't swing her resume like a sword. She made a single shot, and that shot told the entire truth. Back in the crowd, Burke didn't speak. His eyes were on the ground. The men who had laughed with him earlier now stood stiff, trying to figure out how they'd missed it. How someone like her could be right in front of them, invisible until now. But that was the lesson, wasn't it? True professionals don't announce themselves. They let the results do the talking. Cade didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't even blink when the general turned to his aide and barked, "Bring me her file, now." Because she knew what he'd find. The silence stretched, sacred and whole. On that range, surrounded by dust, failure, and disbelief, one shot had cut through everything false and left only the truth standing. The truth that the most dangerous person in the room is often the quietest, and in the Marine Corps, they would never forget her name again. Gunnery Sergeant Mason Burke didn't sleep that night. Not really. He lay in his bunk with his eyes open, staring at the underside of the rack above him, as if the answer to his shame might be etched in the paint. But nothing came. Just silence. The same silence that had wrapped around him when General Halverson saluted Staff Sergeant Eliza Kade and walked right past him. He wasn't angry, not anymore. He was humiliated, but not by her, by himself, because now he remembered. Every word he'd said to her, every smirk, every joke, every time he waved her off like she didn't belong. He had been loud. She had been quiet, He had performed. She had delivered. And in front of the entire base, every ounce of noise he'd built his authority on had crumbled in the shadow of one calm, precise trigger pull. The next morning, Burke arrived at the range before sunrise. No one saw him come. There were no jokes, no lectures, no barking. He didn't wear the instructor's vest, didn't carry his clipboard, just a broom. He swept the brass casings from the line where Cade had taken her shot, not because anyone told him to, not out of punishment, but out of something deeper. He was resetting the ground, starting again. Eliza Kade didn't say anything when she saw him. She simply nodded once. Acknowledgement, nothing more. That afternoon, while most of the base was at chow, Burke walked up to her where she stood cleaning her rifle under a shade tarp. His voice was quiet, measured. "Sergeant," he said, "I was wrong. I was arrogant, and I have a lot to learn. Would you teach me?" Cade looked at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't rub it in. She just studied him for a moment. Not his words, but his eyes. And when she saw what she needed to see, that his pride was gone and humility had taken its place, she gave him the smallest, most powerful gesture of all. A single nod. They began after hours. No announcements, no official class roster. Burke showed up quietly after the range closed, and Cade stayed behind, setting up steel targets by hand. She didn't lecture. She didn't give motivational speeches. She simply taught by doing. Burke followed her in silence, adjusted when she corrected his stance, listened when she explained how to read wind off the mirage line rising from the sand, watched her take shots in complete silence, her breathing barely perceptible, her pulse seemingly absent. It was humbling, but it was also freeing. Because for the first time in years, Mason Burke didn't have to perform. He didn't have to be the loudest. He just had to learn. And Eliza Kade, she wasn't there to impress. She was there to serve, even if it meant serving the very people who once mocked her. There's a myth we're sold in leadership, that strength comes from dominance, that respect is something we extract by volume, by posture, by command. But that's not mentorship. That's fear, and fear is loud. True mentorship, the kind that actually transforms, is quiet. It doesn't shout. It invites. It makes room. It builds without breaking. It doesn't need to say, "I told you so," because the lesson teaches itself. Burke didn't become less of a Marine by becoming her student. He became more of one, because he finally let go of the image he thought he had to uphold, and stepped into the humility that real growth demands. Weeks passed. Other Marines started noticing, quietly at first. They stayed late too, asked questions, listened. Not just to Cade, but to Burke. He didn't act like the old Burke anymore. He didn't shout across the range. He didn't bark instructions just to be heard. He spoke carefully. He corrected with intention. And when he made a mistake, he owned it. Out loud. One night, a young lance corporal approached Cade after observing her shoot under crosswind. "Ma'am," he said, unsure, "that technique, where did you learn that?" She didn't offer some classified origin story, didn't puff herself up. She just said, "A good mentor taught me, and now I pass it on." And that was that. No hierarchy, no titles. Just the quiet passing of skill from one Marine to another, the way it was meant to be. By the end of the month, the unofficial after-hours class had grown into something else. A community, a culture shift. And Burke? He wasn't at the center. Cade was. But she didn't want the spotlight. She gave it away. One lesson, one shot, one quiet correction at a time. They had laughed at her line in the dirt. Now they called it the Cade line. Not because she named it, but because she earned it. And the man who had once mocked her, he now stood on that same line, not as a gatekeeper, but as a grateful student. Something changed on the range after that. And it wasn't the targets. It wasn't the equipment or the facilities. It wasn't the command structure or some new directive from headquarters. It was the silence. Not emptiness, not absence, but purposeful silence. The kind that came from focus, from respect, from knowing that noise didn't make you sharper. It just made you louder. Gunnery Sergeant Burke no longer barked from the tower. He walked the line like a student, eyes observant, corrections subtle. Young recruits who once mimicked his arrogance began mimicking something else, the stillness of Eliza Kade. And Cade? She never changed. She still showed up before sunrise, still rolled out chalk, still trained after hours. But now the line she had painted that day, the one they laughed at, wasn't just a mark in the dirt anymore. It had become a landmark. A month after the legendary shot, the base commander called for a small gathering. No formation, no formal orders, just a moment of recognition. They had bolted a small brass plaque into the ground, right at the start of that chalk line. Nothing fancy, just 5 words. The Cade line, prove it here. That was it. No medals, no speeches, because the point wasn't to celebrate Cade, it was to honor what she stood for. From that day on, every new recruit walked past that plaque. They stepped onto that line not with swagger, but with intent. It was no longer the place where they started their shots. It was the place where they proved they were ready to take them. Legacy is not a title, it's not a ribbon. It's not carved into walls or shouted over loudspeakers. Real legacy, the kind that endures, is made of the tiny decisions no one sees. The ones you make when no one's watching. The ones that define you not by what you say, but by what you refuse to say. Kay didn't need the spotlight. She didn't chase applause. She didn't need to be saluted to feel respected. She simply held the line, quietly, deliberately. And in doing so, she gave everyone else the permission to stop pretending and start improving. She taught them that real precision doesn't just apply to the barrel, it applies to character. 1 year later, General Halverson returned to the base for a new class graduation. He stood in front of those recruits, the white line glowing in the morning light like a scar etched into the earth. And he told them a story. There was a woman, he began, who arrived with a paint wheel and left behind a doctrine. He told them about the wind, the shot, the tattoo. But mostly, he told them about the silence. And then he pointed to the plaque. You want to be great? Don't shout about it. Don't wear it like armor. Just walk that line and let the shots speak. The Cade line endures, not because of what it marks on the range, but because of what it marked in every Marine who watched her hold it. Because in the end, it wasn't just about a single bullet. It was about the message behind it. You don't need to be loud to be legendary. And in a world where too many confuse volume with value, Eliza Kade proved that the ones who change everything are the ones who say the least. Not all heroes come with medals. Some just carry a chalk line and the discipline to draw it, perfectly, quietly, and without recognition. Staff Sergeant Eliza Kade didn't arrive to impress. She wasn't there for validation. She came to do her job, and when the moment of crisis came, she stepped forward without a word. In a world full of noise, distraction, and posturing, her story is a powerful reminder. It's not the loudest person who defines the moment, it's the one who's prepared when the moment comes. And that lesson goes far beyond the firing range. In today's America, where social media rewards the fastest take instead of the wisest voice, many of us, especially our older generations, know what it feels like to be overlooked. You build your life, your reputation, your work ethic, but someone louder grabs the spotlight. But the truth is, those who stay quiet often carry the deepest strength. Whether it's the grandmother who holds the family together without needing thanks, the factory worker who trained 3 bosses but never got promoted, the veteran who served with honor, came home, and never bragged, or the nurse who stayed late, not for a paycheck, but because it mattered. These people, you, are the Cades of the world. And maybe we need to start telling your stories. So let me ask, have you ever met someone like Eliza Kade? Someone whose quiet presence changed everything? Or maybe you've lived a moment like hers, where staying calm under pressure made all the difference. Drop your story in the comments. Let's give voice to the quiet strength that rarely gets recognized. We especially want to hear from our senior viewers. Your stories carry wisdom the world can't afford to lose. This channel exists because of stories like yours. And this community grows every time you share them. And if you found something meaningful in this story, a memory, a lesson, a truth, please hit that like button. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And if you know someone who is a quiet warrior, send this video to them. Let them know you see them. Because legacy isn't built by shouting, it's built by doing, by walking straight when others bend, by showing up when others freeze. Eliza Kade may be fictional, but her spirit lives in every American who ever stood their ground, not with noise, but with action. So as we end this story, we leave you with this. Draw your line, hold it, and when the wind comes, let the world see who you really are. We'll be here, listening,